And we begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. For this study session tonight, we'll go ahead and get started with, before I forget, we have to do our roll call. It still has some formalities.
Just a few. Commissioner Treadwell?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Shaw?
Here.
Commissioner Werner?
Here.
Commissioner Stanley?
Here.
Mayor?
Here. Okay, now we'll begin with some announcements from the city manager, if you have any.
No announcements this evening.
Okay, and city clerk, deputy city clerk.
Just a couple quick ones. Meetings scheduled for this week are Traverse City Light and Power will meet on Tuesday, December 10th at 5:45 p.m. here in the chambers. And the Joint Rec Authority has rescheduled their meeting from last week to this Wednesday, December 11th at 7 p.m. in the chambers.
All right, thank you. We'll go into now our topic for discussion, and tonight for our study session we have one topic, which is the discussion on water and sewer rates, metering, and practices, and I will hand that over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Shamro. So this presentation is a presentation in two parts, and it is chock full of really good data. This is the first time that the city has given a presentation like this in a generation, and so we broke it up into two parts. And I will be introducing some of the staff that are with us tonight. But the staff and myself are actively seeking feedback on the presentation itself. We want to make sure that people understand the data. So as you're going through, if you have questions or say, hey, maybe that information should be spread over 2 slides, or maybe we need more or less on this, we would like to take that feedback tonight. Additionally, Jana, our Deputy Finance Director, who will be giving the first part of the presentation, she's prepared a beautiful script to attend to these slides. So she might be looking down. So if you have a question, I'll be looking for hands to go up. She's also got some natural places within the presentation to stop and ask for questions. But I'll be keeping an eye on commissioners if you have questions, and she knows I might be interrupting. So with that, I'd like to introduce Heidi Sheppy, our Finance Director, who is here to take us away.
Yeah, so during the 2024 budget hearings, you requested more detail regarding the sewer and water rates. So we took that feedback. We assembled a team to prepare a presentation for you today and the process behind determining how we come up with the sewer and water rates. During the review process, we found opportunities for improvements that we'll be discussing tonight in the presentation. As we got into the details, we found a lot of moving parts, and the presentation's a little lengthy. So with the 2 parts, as Liz said, we'll be looking for feedback, and we'll bring part 2 back in the new year. I'd also like to take this time to thank the team for all their time and hard work they put into this presentation, especially my deputy, Jana Robinson, who's been living and breathing sewer water rates for the last month. And now I'll turn it over to Jana.
Guys, sorry. Can you guys hear me through this? Okay, it doesn't feel, when you're back there, it doesn't feel like it. So before we start, I'd like to formally introduce myself because I think this is the first time that I've actually met you guys in person. I feel very grateful to have the opportunity to present this information to you. And thank you for your patience during the transition with our office. We're now in the position to address some of the questions that you guys have had over the time that I've been here. We're now addressing water sewer rate questions that arose in the budget year process. So part 1 of this presentation is what we hope to cover tonight, and the purpose of the presentation is to convey current water sewer billing rate determinations and proposed changes for future rates. Assuming that not everyone is familiar with some aspects of the process, we wanted to start from the bottom and build up. So we're starting, first off, you guys have the slides at the fund level. So the water sewer funds are enterprise funds. Therefore, the cost of providing those services has to be recaptured by billing for those services. There's no general fund appropriation to this fund. The revenues captured do not leave the fund and will only go toward costs associated with providing that service. Our costs are primarily recaptured through utility billing and bulk water sewer agreements with the townships. There are some other revenues due to other water sewer activity like tap-ins for new customers tapping into the system, turn-ons and turn-offs. Those are 2 other components that we do plan to do a similar review of, but we're not covering those tonight. We're just covering utility billing of city residents. So we also, as you can see on the slide, There are very large projects in both funds over the next 5 years. That's at the bottom of the slide. 30 million in water projects and 54 million in sewer projects. These are huge projects. We haven't seen projects like these in a very long time. So when we have these large projects that increase our cost to provide these services, so our goal is to distribute those costs in a method that aligns with the goals of the city of Traverse City, things like conservation, affordability, water is a human right, but also in a way that is in line with current industry practices to determine utility billing rates. That being said, we are proposing to make changes to our current practices, but that's what we're going to be reviewing first. So this is what we're doing. That's what we did this year to determine our rates. So this slide's going to likely look really familiar. It's a basic overview of our current water rates straight from the resolution. Currently, customers are charged a monthly base rate depending on the size of their meter. For the average in-city resident, the meter for the average residential in-city customer, the meter size is that 5/8 or 3/4 inch, and that base rate right now is $16. The base rate for all sizes right now includes 6 centum cubic feet, which is a mouthful, or CCF of usage. That's roughly 4,500 gallons of water. 1 CCF is approximately 748 gallons. So the CCF is a little bit weird. I'll be referencing it a lot in the coming slides. It is an industry unit, and I understand it's not a unit that's generally known, but we do bill in CCF because our meters read in CCF. But in time, that is another change that we hope to make so that it's easier for customers to read their bills. We have a new billing software that would allow us to make that shift, but that's for another time. I also wanted to point out that at the bottom, we note that water we sell to townships is not included in this rate. Those are dictated by bulk water agreements that we mentioned in the previous slide. We're not reviewing those today. Those will have to be, we want to review those as they come due. So the next one I believe is in 2027. We just did a review on those. But that is an area we want to revisit. There's potential that some could open up before then, and we would then revisit at that time. But tonight, just customers within the city, not those bulk water agreements. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be answered now, but because we're talking about like next iteration of this, it would be helpful to me at least to have some sense of outside the city limits, because there's not much. It's just like an extra fringe is my understanding around the city. Like, is that 5% of our water? Again, you don't need to answer it now.
I'm going to make a note.
I would think it's fairly small because we have these bulk agreements, but just to have some order of magnitude.
I do go through later in the presentation where I show in-city and out-of-city meter sizes for water. So it shows exactly the meter size and if they're in the city or out of the city. So a little bit later, you'll see exactly what we're charging for with active customers right now. So you will see that later. I don't have exact stats on it, but the information is in there, just not in that format of percentages.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would it be useful to know, like, since when has it been $16 for that average residence per
Sorry.
FT?
For CCF, that $16 was this year and last year. We do rate increases, but we didn't do a rate increase this year. So I don't have history beyond last year, but it did increase in fiscal year in 2023, didn't increase in fiscal year in 2024. Fiscal year in 2023 was the last time I think that it did increase. So over these last 2 years, we haven't increased it. But it was,
Is there
it's
a
just,
slide in here that shows, because that's what we're talking about is pricing ultimately, right? Is it show?
we don't show like the historical determination of that base rate. In this proposal, we are showing what we would like to align, how we'd like to align with industry standards to change it to a ready-to-serve fee. So we don't go too much into it because I'm hoping that like in the following slides, you'll see that the methodology that we use currently really
Is from
promotes.
the 70s and really old.
Yeah, it promotes like different standards, and so we're trying to get it to align more with the direction we want to move in.
Yeah, we can add a slide on the historical base rate so that it's in the next, when we edit this one, we can add that.
And also in and out of city. So a lot of questions right off the bat. I was thinking these are going to be my easy slides. That's my basic overview of water rates. But again, we are proposing changes. but we're going to go into sewer rates. So this slide, again, going to look pretty familiar, straight from the resolution. Sewer customers are always also charged that monthly base rate, currently $47 for the average resident. Sorry, guys. The base rate also includes that 6 CCF, but unlike water, you'll see that there's only one sewer rate. So when we were going through this, I was like, why do we have all this stratified list of meter rates for water, but we don't do that same thing with sewer? And so looking into it, this is due to pre-treatment requirements imposed on larger users or more difficult to treat substances. So we don't charge based on meter size, rather on the difficulty to treat that water right now. And we'll go more into about how usage for sewer is determined in the following slide. But before we do, note again that wastewater that we sell to townships is not included in this rate structure. And we'll go into the master sewer agreements in the future. Any questions on sewer before we go into in-depth sewer billing practices? So since sewer is a little bit more complex than water billing, we wanted to go into that deeper dive on sewer practices. Unlike water, where we bill strictly based on metered usage, there are some differences in billing based on the customer's setup for sewer. For most customers, sewer costs are based on the winter meter usage, and we make adjustments for irrigation based on their usage in the winter quarter. That's a lot of words to say that we take the customer's average usage from January through March, and then we say, okay, this is the time period where you weren't using your water for things like irrigation, filling up pools. So we say that in the summer months, your sewer usage is based on your average usage from those winter quarters. So that's like the first thing that is a little bit crazy in sewer. Does anybody have any questions on winter quarter billing? Yeah.
So snowbirds, how does that play out with a snowbird who isn't here at all in the winter?
So that is one area where we are not recapturing any sewer costs, because if they're not here, then we don't have an average estimate for them. So they're not getting billed for it. Also, snowbirds account for, we have 40 accounts right now that are turned off in the winter. So it's not a huge subset of the population, but it is costs that we're not able to recapture in that winter period and throughout the year when they're actually using. So they get to turn off in the winter. And that's a part of my proposal too, is that the snowbirds are charged a ready to serve fee year round, just like everybody else. Right now they're able to shut it off. And that kind of promotes some inequity in the people who we're ready to serve them, but we're not charging them year round for it. And this concept is it's not, I'm not innovating this concept. This is something that's used elsewhere. And I'm going to go into that in the next couple of slides too, to just show how we're trying to align more with industry standards. I'm sorry, a little bit more on sewer billing practices. There are some sewer billings that are based on deduct meters and some that are based on usage due to a separate irrigation meter. So we don't use that irrigation winter quarter estimate that we do for almost all customers. There's about 400 customers that they have a separate irrigation meter or they have a deduct meter. And these are customers that want to generally know more about their usage on irrigation or have a higher usage in irrigation. We'll delve more into the deduct meters and the irrigation meters in part two, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of overview on some other ways that we bill for irrigation and how that is tied into sewer. So starting off at the cost to provide water services. This information is from fiscal year 2025. So as you can see, there are three main types of expenditures: operating expenditures, capital expenditures, and debt financing, totaling to about $8.7 million. Of that, our operating expenditures are at the $3.6 million, and these are the costs that we incur to operate the plant and be ready to serve customers. Capital expenditures are for capital projects, and debt financing is generally due to payments toward financed capital projects. So if you look down to the debt financing bullet, you'll see that debt financing is expected to increase to about $1.2 million by 2030. And this is due to those principal payments on that $30 million in projects starting to become due. So huge increase in debt financing, and we're trying to figure out how to distribute the cost of these increases. That's the intent every time that we set the rates. And then again for sewer, this is information from our fiscal year end 2025 budget. We see three main categories of expenditures totaling about $16.8 million, those same categories. It's important to note our operating expenditures are about 6.88 million, and then similar to water, these are costs that we incur to operate the plant and be ready to serve customers. You'll see that there's also an increase in debt financing for sewer to roughly 2.1 million by 2029. And again, that's due to those large capital projects that are going to those payments that are going to start becoming due. So you see that huge increase there. And so I showed this to my sister, and she was like, "What is that?" Once we have I'm going to go into a little bit. Once we have our budgeted costs for the year, we currently use a software called Waterworth to help us determine water and sewer rates. We enter our actual revenue and expenditure data for prior years, as well as our budgeted revenues and expenditures for the upcoming year. Waterworth allows us to add in assumptions for future costs to project up to 40 years. We currently project out to 25 years, and I know it's a little small, but here's where you see an example of the output that Waterworth provides using our fiscal year in 2025 budget data scenario. So this is a graphical representation that is very beneficial, but is also very difficult to interpret without some additional explanation. So we're going to take a small break, and we're going to welcome representatives from Waterworth to provide us with more information on what this is. And yeah, if you guys want to break, we're going to invite them in on the Zoom, but it'll just be just a moment.
Yeah. I was like, I don't see anybody back there. Getting smoother at this in the middle of the meetings. I said we're getting smoother at getting these online in the middle of the meetings.
And on it.
Are you in? There he is.
We need to do a
Aaron, are
song.
you there?
Ariane, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great.
Is Calvin joining us also?
Yeah, I just messaged him. He'll be here shortly.
Perfect. Thank you.
It was in the email, but it was not like an hour.
Is everyone all right to
There-
continue? Is everyone okay to continue?
Yep.
I think they're both here, so, so welcome back quickly. I think we're all set. Are you guys all set, Ariane?
Yes, I'm all
Okay.
set.
Okay, then please welcome Ariane Chawla and Calvin Coles of Waterworth.
Hi, everyone.
Take it away.
Awesome. So, hi, everyone. My name is Ari. I'm with the client success team here at Waterworth. I'm joined by my senior member, one of the best in the business, Calvin Coles. And thank you for inviting me here today. So, just before I begin, I know that we've been working a lot in the past with Brian and Jenna right now. I want to say that to provide some context, Waterworth is a software platform that empowers local governments like Traverse City toward achieving that financial sustainability while balancing affordability and intergenerational equity. Now, as we go through discussion, this can be tough for communities that we're working with, but it can be done through the practice of what's called as continuous revenue management, which is two things, really. One is keeping a live financial forecast model up to date at all times, which you'll see today. And two, having these conversations, keeping you, our elected officials, informed on a continuous basis about the financial reality so you can make the smart decisions quickly and efficiently. I would say, as we go through the presentation today, think of it as results, not reports. Today, we're going to be seeing the visualizations of the water and sewer fund's current trajectory developed by Brian and Jenna for you to consider, discuss, and iterate upon. My role here today, and as well as Calvin's, is not to advise you on what exactly to do. At the end of the day, you're the experts of your community. Our expertise is in our platform, and we will help explain any underlying math in motion and desired facilitate a conversation around the models to help inform any decisions that you make moving forward. I'm just going to take a moment to pause in case there are initial questions about my introduction.
I think we're ready to go ahead.
Perfect. Love it. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? All right.
Yep.
All right. Perfect. So there are two sides. The one is we have the water service area, and then we have the sewer. So I'm going to begin by showing you the water modules. The first one that we have was developed by Brian some time ago. And right now, all you see is some pretty colors in front of us. I'm just going to start breaking it down just to understand what are we exactly looking at in front of us. We know it's a financial model, what's more. So the first component we're going to look at is the revenue requirements for the city beyond 2024. And then you can just scale on the y-axis showing the monetary amounts as well. So we're going to break it down by the operating expenses. You can see that we have all the data up until 2024, 2025, and then we also have an inflation of 3 to 5% put in there, which is why you see the values right after the sunset. And then we have the current debt service that begins from 2024, and we stop paying it from 2025 onwards. And then a proposed debt service, which comes in for those big projects in 26 and 28, and it drops off by 2046, the 20-year mark. Similarly, the reason why we have debt is for those capital improvements. And you can see a lot of them are occurring from 24 to 29. And you can start to see it taper off. And the reason why we see it become a straight line is because we just put a placeholder in there for the future capital spend. This is almost something that we discussed briefly. And just I wanted to say that, okay, we're going to be spending some cash in the future. We don't know exactly what. But as we get to that point, we can always keep it updated as we get close to that date and have some more values and projects in mind. So all of these that you're looking at right now make up the revenue requirements for us. And now we're going to proceed and start layering our revenues on top of it, which is our city rate consumption. And then we have our base fees as well. You start to see it layer up with the two. And then we have some other operating revenues, some developer contributions, non-operating revenues, grants, and some borrowed funds. And now you see this beautiful picture, almost a city skyline-esque picture, where you have the mountains in the back that make up all of our expenses, and then you have the buildings and skyscrapers in the front that make up our revenues. So when you start comparing the two, you notice that whenever the mountains in the back, let's say for 24 and 25, are taller than our little skyscrapers, we'll notice once I overlay the cash that it will start to drop the line. And let's say in 2027, when we're getting a lot more funding for our projects, we'll start to see the cash position start to rise. Which is why when I overlay it right there, you'll start to see the drop from 24, 25, then stability. Then from 27, we can notice that the cash position, this dark line right there, black line we see, start to rise and start to taper off. So we isolate the cash position right now. We see that, okay, we're starting to see a small drop off and then eventually starts to rise and then it starts to level off at a certain point. And there are some readjustments that Brian had put into place, which we'll talk about further, how we're able to adjust this cash. But the way he did it was to looking at the guidelines. It starts with our operating threshold. You can see this red dot line in front of our screen. And the red dot line represents any you can say almost like a rainy day fund where we have some money kept aside, which is based on some numeric numbers, which is about 35% of our operating expenses and 15% of our sales, which is for any unforeseen expenses that we might get for operating costs itself. So that's how the red dot line is made. And our mission is to always stay above that target at all times. And on top of that, once we have the operating threshold, we know that we don't want to go below that stage. We also have the cash position target. Now, this is an ambiguous number that we put on top of it. And the difference between the two that we look at between the operating threshold and this new cash position target line is $3 million in capital reserves that we have put into place, which basically means that if there's, let's say a main breaks, for example, we have enough cash or at least some cash to cover those expenses. and some surplus. And the way we want it to interact in the end is to make sure that we stay above this red dotted line and fluctuate amongst this black dotted line. That's the picture we're aiming for. Now, again, we don't want to stay right across it because in some years we'll build up our reserves and in others we'll be spending. And that's the way, the cyclical nature of it, essentially. So once we have that vision in front of us, the way we were able to achieve that, at least in this particular model where Brian was working on, is that we go to step 7 and just planning for the future. We have mapped out 2 different things. The first thing where we can see right here on the screen is that we have population growth, which is just growth in demand for water. And you can see that we have put 0.6 for the base and the consumption. That's the growth rate for our community. And you can see that we have put a 3.25% increase in our base rate for 4 years up until 2029, then 3%, then 2%, and then 6 in 2040, and then 0 at 2041. Now, these are just arbitrary numbers that we put into place. It doesn't mean this is the fixed schedule because we can always come back and change them at any point of time. But these are some of the numbers and revenue requirements that we have in front of us that allow us to steer this cash position closer to that black dotted line, as mentioned earlier. And the configuration of this could be completely different, but it'll come out to be somewhere the same. And we have our city rate consumption, which is a flat fee of 3.5% throughout. That carries on year after year. I'm going to give you guys a moment there. I just explained a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions?
I just wanted to add in, Aryan, this is the model that we put together when we determined rates in this fiscal year. So when we presented to you guys the budget in May, this is the model that we used to make sure that the rates we were giving you could be used in this year, and then that we would also have a forecast for the next 25 years that was sustainable, putting us in a healthy financial position based on the assumptions that were in place, like the population growth, wage inflation. That's what this model is. So this is what Brian put together for our current billing practices. There is a different model based on the proposal tonight, but this is what we had before. So just to put in there.
I have a question. That 0.6 growth rate year over year, is that average for Traverse City only? Is that for the county?
2020 census versus 2010 for those who are watching at home.
And that's only for the city?
Yes.
Yeah, they give us data. Did anybody have questions before Aryan continues? All right, you're good to go, Aryan.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Perfect. I'm just going to move up to the next scenario. That's something that we just developed over the months. Is this model right here, and you can see it's very similar in terms of how the cash position is reacting. But just to break it down, the operating expenses, the current debt, proposed debt service, and capital improvements is very similar. As the mix of the revenue requirements, but what is different is how we adjust our rates and our reserve policies. So starting off, we have our city rate consumption, our city rate base, that makes up the revenues, and then we have other operating developer contributions, non-operating grants, and borrow funds, as very similar to the previous image that we saw. But a thing to point out is how these 2 rates, which is our consumption and base rates, have been increasing over the years, which will be shown in step 7, and how they are affecting the cash position itself and how it's interacting with those guidelines. So before I go on to the policies themselves and the rates, you can see that with the cash position, with the new adjustment, is that we have a new operating threshold, which is quite similar to the old one. It's just the 35% of the operating expenses, about roughly 4 months. But we've also increased the percentage for rate stabilization because we're going to be enacting some new changes in our rate structure, which may cause us to maybe increase or decrease in our sales. That uncertainty is why we've increased our reserves for rate stabilization and why we're keeping more money aside for the future, that variability. which is why you see this percentage increase from 15 to 20% and the operating threshold rise. And after that, we also set a new cash position target. In this case, it's not as high up as 3 million. It's somewhere around the 1.5 to 2 million mark, increasing at 3%. And the reason for that is because Jenna, I just made, use a rule of thumb, the industry average of making sure that we have about 1 to 2% of our capital expenses left aside so that we can use it on any future projects. Now, our aim in the future is to make it more accurate and work on some asset renewal and get some more data in there so we can have a more accurate figure, but this is what we have as a placeholder currently.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
I was just going to elaborate on that a little bit. So we previously were not using that industry standard rule of thumb to generate this. It's an industry standard right now, but like Aryan was saying, we're going to work with the water sewer team and Jacobs to actually get a comprehensive view of what our assets are, so we know what the cost to renew our assets would be. So I think that the industry standard is every 100 years plan to replace your full system, and it's between 50 and 100 years. But that's the goal long term. Right now, that operating threshold or that rate is at an industry standard. So that is one place that I want to add improvements in future years, and just as we have more time. So just pointing that out that in the future that will be based on our actual plant. That's a goal that we have of meeting with Waterworth.
awesome. And also, Jenna actually took took a lot of effort to do this as well. So what she did was she also made sure that the rates that we have in our structure is smoother. Because currently, remember how I was showing you 3.5 and then 2%, 3%, it kept changing every so often. So she had taken the average and made sure that we had about, let's say, a standard 2% across the board, keeping up with inflation. As I mentioned earlier, we had inflation of about 3% for operating expenses. We're making sure that we at least can keep up our revenues. And then eventually, if we don't have any big projects, we can even drop it down to 1% every year, depending on how it looks in the future. But once 2040s come along, we can definitely make a decision there as well. We can always look back at our capital requirements. And the same structure also follows for just keeping it at 3.5 for consumption throughout. And we have the same growth rate in this model.
Can I ask about that 3.5%? Is that per capita consumption going up 3.5% annually?
It's consumption 3.5 consumption across the board. So right now our base rate is our consumption rate is 1 rate. So that rate would increase at 3.5%. So yes, like across the board.
So that's a rate, not consumption. Okay. Some words he used earlier, it wasn't clear whether.
That's what.
Never mind.
Sorry.
I was afraid it might be actual like usage.
Rate increase. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. So that covers what we have for the water side of things. Jen, if you'd like to add more, I can just move on to the wastewater as well. Just want to be mindful of time.
I just wanted to add in one thing about the model. How Aryan was talking about how we're being a little bit conservative this year in rates. Our proposal is going to be geared toward promoting conservation. So we are anticipating that we will see a customer response to that. And we had to build in that uncertainty within our model. So that is why he is saying that rate stabilization went up. And it was because we're trying to account for potential customer changes. But then we also have to account for regular things too, like weather, because if we have a dry season, we're not going to be using a lot of water. So that's what that rate accounts for right now, is that uncertainty in consumption. And we believe that there's going to be even more uncertainty if we propose methods that are promoting consumption or conservation. So that's why it's a little bit higher than it's I think it's double in sewer at 6% from 3 to 7%, and then 5% increase in water from 15 to 20%. So just a little bit more information on that.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So One other thing you can do as well after this presentation is that uh, you can also compare the two models before I go into wastewater and sewer. So something that you can do is just try to compare the two models that we have in front of us and just try to see what the difference in the cash position is and how they react to their different thresholds. And that gives you a better picture of what we're trying to convey. John. I think one of the notes is that both of them are reacting the same way, but as Jenna mentioned earlier as well, one of them has a higher operating threshold, and also we're trying to also make sure that our rates are smoother. Instead of having to change our rates quite often, we're just keeping a standard 2% throughout, so it's easier on the customers themselves. Awesome. Okay. I'm just going to move on to sewer now to be mindful of time. And we can start with the first model that Brian had created. In front of us, we have the same premises where we have our operating expenses from 24 onwards, then the current debt service that gets added on, but we currently don't have any. And we have proposed debt service, which comes in, and you can clearly see that as it increases as the projects come in from capital improvements, especially from 24 to 27, which is why you see a steady increase in proposed debt service. And these are your revenue requirements that come up for our sewer systems. And we can start overlaying it with our revenues, which we have city rate consumption, the city base rates, the revenues, and then your other operating revenues, Delta contributions, non-operating revenues, grants, and forward funds. We get the same image where you have the revenues and expenses outlined for us. And then we start overlaying our cash position with our reserve policies. So in total, after we get this beautiful image in front of us, I did want to show that once I isolate the cash and we have the operating threshold in there, that means that we're staying above, and it's clearly a great sight to see that with this current model, we're able to stay above the red dotted line and fluctuate amongst this little black dotted line in front of us. Now, Jenna also made sure that we had the next model that you'll see, we wanted to account for maybe the rate changes increase our operating thresholds, account for more capital expenses, if any. But in this current model, with the way we have planned it out and our capital expenses and capital improvements, you can see that right now it's relatively smooth, and it has a big increase from 24 to 28. But after that point, it stays around the $4 million mark. But in our next model, I'll show you what happens if you see an increase, especially if we're sitting high on cash. So if I go to the next model, currently, I just want to showcase as one more thing for this one is that we're sitting at the same growth rate, which is 0.6 for the base rate and the variable rate, sitting at around 0.6. Then we have 3% coming in 2028, 2%, 0, and then 0.5 as well for 2033. This is just one particular scenario. We definitely have different numbers that we're playing around with, and you can see that this 0.5, at least for the base rate, carries on from 2033 onwards, just to make sure that we have enough revenues coming in. And the real moneymaker here would be our 4.5% for the variable revenues. Are there any questions before I move on to the proposed model?
We're good.
Okay, perfect. So now, for the second model itself, it follows the same structure, but I can just show you the differences and highlight them. Now, the key point here is that the cash position, as we're looking at right now, is much higher than the first model. As you can see, that's clearly above operating threshold and our position target as well. The operating thresholds remain relatively the same, while, as Jenna was mentioning earlier, that the rate stabilization has increased and you can say that the operating threshold also increased from about 3 to 7.5%, and the restoration also doubled. So we have been a bit more conservative with our cash reserve policies, which is why you see this here. And you may notice that we are staying above our cash position target in this scenario, which may say that, okay, are we increasing our rates too aggressively, or what's the status with that? But in this case, I would also argue that if I just go back to the home page, if we were to, and remember when I was talking about our capital improvements, if we were to add any large capital projects, it might be a different story altogether, which is why just because we're sitting above our target with this particular scenario, clearly above the cash position target, if we add a project, and now everything is, if I just go to capital expenses and add, let's say, a $5 million project or $7 million project in, say, 2033, if we had a treatment plant coming in for that particular year, you can clearly see how the cash reacts, and we end up going below and really, really close to our operating threshold. And this is almost a type of stress test that we like to conduct with our different models to understand that how much can we pay for in terms of our reserves, how much we have to borrow for, and where do we stand? Because one big project that may show up, let's say down the line, maybe 5 to 10 years down the line, could affect our cash position drastically. And now you can see yourself being below the operating threshold by 2044. That's something to consider when we play around with the model. Awesome. I'm just going to remove that project.
Can I just ask a question about that before I scare people too much with it? So however many millions that spike was,
Yes.
I guess it's more for Mr. 7 million, more for Mr. Krieger. There is, you're assuming that we didn't anticipate that cost. So we couldn't adjust rates, going into that bump. How often does a $7 million emergency happen in the history of our wastewater treatment plant? It can happen, but that's kind of that.
Art Krieger is approaching, just so you know, on the Zoom there. And likewise, how often does it happen where it's not something that we might get FEMA or grant funding or something
If it
to
truly
help
was an
offset?
emergency,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Hi, Art Krieger, Director of Utilities with the city. Something that large is not really anticipated, but especially putting in 35, 36 million into it in the next few years, we would expect things to roll along and do well. I will go back in time here a little bit. Before I became director, Dave Green was working as the director, and all of a sudden it became evident that the membrane treatment modules had to be replaced at about $1 million a piece. There were 8 of them, and that came up really quickly, and it was a very compact time to get them done and make sure that nothing failed. And it was just like hindsight's 2020. We put them in brand new in early 2000s. They were supposed to last 12 to 15 years, and all of a sudden here it is 2015 or so. So something like that was unexpected, but we're working with Jacobs closely, trying to anticipate costs out at least 20 years, but the CIP kind of focuses on the next 6 capital improvement projects. So we hope we don't get blindsided by anything like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, but
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate the stress test idea, just perspective, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think just to say that that project is further out, and we do want to focus on what we can look at for 24 to 27 in terms of the projects that we have in front of us. And the team has done a wonderful job to make sure that we have secured the funding for it. And that's when we go into our rates, and you can clearly see that currently we have the same projections for growth, and we have made sure that our consumption rate is increasing by about 1.5 over the years, and maybe we're adding a 1% in 2028 to make sure they're able to pay for those debt service payments out to the future, and then slowly increase to 1.2 as well as for the requirements. So essentially, base rate increased by 1% in this model from 28 up until 2035, and then you have 1.2 in 2036, and that continues, while we have about 1.5 in 2026 for the consumption rate, and that carries on until 2038. And again, I would say for everyone that these are rates that can be changed and are arbitrary for the changes, but it's just trying to show us that I would like to make it smooth, easy for everyone just to anticipate the rate changes rather than seeing a spike of like say 10%, because the worst thing that could happen to us if I just make a clone is, let's say if I make a clone of this model right here, is that if we do nothing for the foreseeable future and then start our program of rates, let's say if I eliminate all of these different changes in front of us, and then I start acting a little too late, where I put, let's say 1% in 2030. And that might not be enough to just keep up with the capital projects. That's something to keep in mind, where if we put 2%, let's say in 2030, that could help us, but it may not have the same impact while it's giving 1% early on. But at the same time, this also shows there's different ways to tackle situations. Any questions there? Anyone would like to maybe try some different figures as well?
I don't see any takers, not even from the scientists on our team, so we can continue.
Awesome. Calvin, do you have anything to add in this part? Well,
No, other than I'm sorry I've been so quiet in the corner here. Yeah, I think to Arian's point, as well as for sewer and as well for water, our main goal by creating financial cash flow forecast models is to give councils and boards an opportunity to better strategic plan for the future. So obviously nobody likes a situation where 10 years from now you've done nothing and then you have to do a 20-30% rate increase. So we want to be looking at what we can do today and how the choices that are made today can impact and compound over time to ease the impact that your ratepayers are actually going to see. So we've been working with Art and Brian and now Jenna and the team there for a number of years, trying to understand the cash flow and understand how these projects impact your rates, especially with things like borrowing for these large projects. And the purpose of this model is not to say, okay, in 2038, your rates are going to go up by 2%. The purpose of this model is to forecast and see how your cash flow is looking, and then be able to make the best decision that you as a council can make today to impact the future and to maybe lessen the blow on the long-term future. So that's all that I'd add in. If there's any questions about the strategic, like not just necessarily across the board rate increases, but changes to your rate structure and looking at things like equity and affordability, as well as water conservation, I'm more than happy to touch on anything like that as well.
Looks like we're good.
Cool.
I also just want to say, so Kelvin and Ari are going to be working with the townships to develop models in Waterworth. They did use them in the past, but it was less on an individual level. So they're working with them too, so that the townships are kind of implementing the same methodology. I think that's everything we plan to cover in your guys' portion. I don't think you had anything else. But correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming in. I'm hoping that that gave a better understanding of all those colors, all those mountains. And so thank you guys so much.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us as well. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Just watch ourselves as we watch next.
Sorry. I'm going to come back on. My first degree was in statistics, so that was a very beneficial meeting when I met with them. I loved all of that. And I'm really hoping that the takeaways for you guys were pretty comparable. Those guys are great as far as working with you to model around the goal that you have. Also because they work in this industry specifically, they have like some cautionary suggestions. So like if we went to a straight consumption rate, that's something that would be very volatile in terms of that they've seen. So like whenever somebody goes to that, they usually, that's something that you'd go back out of because you can't account for any of the revenues that you'd be getting if you have a really, really dry season, and you'd have to have a wildly high rate stabilization, and then in turn have a really high consumption rate because you would have to look forward to those dry seasons and try to anticipate those. And everybody knows, like in northern Michigan, the weather does what it wants here. So you're kind of trying to play weatherman when you're going straight consumption. So that was one thing because I talked about why couldn't we just charge everybody for what they use, and that was one thing that they cautioned against. Was it sounds good in theory, but practically to recapture the revenue that you need to operate, it doesn't. You're playing weatherman, and that's not something that we want to. It's not a liability that we'd want to take on for the sake of our sewer system or water system.
Jackie.
But sorry, did anybody have any questions? Oh, hi.
Hi. One of the projects that we've been talking about is reducing infiltration, which would, as I understood it, perhaps have a pretty significant long-term effect on less water flowing through the treatment plant. Is something like, I mean, obviously you could model that, but how would you go about developing assumptions around that and sort of integrating into the demand curve the projects that we already know we're hoping to be able to conserve?
So the infiltration, I'm not familiar with that project. I can tell you it's not something that I've built into the model. Or it can elaborate a little bit more, but just off the bat, like conceptually, we would want to know more about what that is expected to do to consumption. So that we would want data, essentially. It's hard to say without that, but we'll let Art give us a little bit more.
Thank you.
So with infiltration, it's kind of like chasing the wind at times. There's no guarantee we're going to go after it. We're going to try to get it removed from the system. So I would look at it more as a benefit if we can remove it, but we're not going to necessarily include it in this kind of analysis. So it'll help. Any little bit we get out is going to help overall, but we can't really plan on how much we're going to remove. We're going to be trying all these methods and finding it and locating it and getting it out of the system. So it's something like a long-term benefit that will help, and then we can adjust the model as we go. If we are able to lower those flows significantly, we can make changes in 2-3 years out if that happens, or longer. So,
But we'd be doing it reactively rather than proactively.
yes, because there's no guarantee of how much we can get out.
You don't have the numbers.
Sometimes you line a pipe here and the groundwater was coming in. When it can't get in anymore, it moves down to the next block and then it's still coming in. So I mean, it's not an exact science, but I think any benefit would show up overall in flows because, as population 0.6 isn't much increase, you wouldn't expect the flows to go up that significantly. If we were able to hit some large infiltration points and seal them off and it actually stays out of the system, we could see those flows drop over, maybe a relatively short period of time. But
And the model is flexible enough to accommodate for what we
Yes.
learn.
Correct. That help?
Don't go away. Um, I don't disagree with what you said, but I would address it slightly differently, maybe a little more optimistically. I think we in the next several iterations of the city commission up here could benefit from just knowing what's possible. So I agree that we don't know what we'll be able to find with I&I and what we'll be able to fix year on year, and groundwater levels change, et cetera. But if we meaning the staff, can at least say, hey, if we reduce I&I over the next decade by 20%, this is what you could expect as far as the model. So just kind of targets, just to know, like, oh, yeah, it's worth pursuing because we could save that much if we can identify and eliminate some of those things. So
Yeah, I agree.
same thing, but kind of a different,
could-
like, this is what might be possible.
We could
But
play the what if
it is what if.
scenario and target.
Yeah,
you know,
make sure
whatever
you
we
keep
get, yeah.
plenty of qualifiers in all the sentences so nobody feels like anything was promised. But hey, if we can address it, we could have these savings.
Well, and that's what Waterworth was touching on too, with their ability to kind of play with the model. We didn't have the opportunity to get into and play with it. I feel like if we had all been sitting down individually with them separately, we probably would have had them run 8 different scenarios each. But to that point, that's a very good point, that we do have the ability to look at that, but we also, as Art's pointing out, have a flexible model here. So I think that's going to be some good information we can play with in the next, as we have these conversations
Yeah,
over the
so-
next few months and years.
You can build it, you can improve the model as you go with more information. So yes, we can
Thank
go
you.
that route. You bet. Anybody else?
I'm going to come back in then. So that was my coverage of our current billing practices. So sorry, I feel like this is a little off for me. So our next step was to investigate how we compare to other entities. So we looked to reliable studies on the subject. The fast facts here are from a study of 55 Michigan municipalities from a trusted third party in 2021. We use these to compare in our current practice. And so right now we charge that base rate that we talked about that includes the 6 CCF. However, most other entities charge what we call a ready to serve fee, and you guys will hear in the coming slides that that's what I'm going to present that we switched to. As we reviewed in our rate structure, we currently include that 6 CCF, not a ready to serve fee. Remember, our rates are $16 for water and $47 for the same amount of water that is in this study. So that down there at the bottom where it says average bill for customer using 4,500 gallons per month, if that was us, you'd see 16 for water and $47 for sewer. So our water costs are about half of the municipalities in the rate study. And remember, this is in 2021. So this is not 2024 data. We've seen massive amounts of inflation since then, and our rates are still faring pretty well. Our sewer cost is $5.30 greater per month, but the increased sewer costs relative to the average participant can largely be attributed to our tertiary treatment Class A wastewater treatment plant. It's been a goal of the city to ensure that water return to the bay is clean and safe. So while it is costly, it plays a crucial role in protecting our it plays a crucial role in protecting our most valuable asset, and it's a finite resource. And so since this data is from 2021, we wanted more up-to-date data. We thought we were in luck because this study is done every 3 years. So we reached out to see if we could get the new numbers, and it's not out yet. So in the next slide, we'll compare our cost to the costs from other state facilities based on information that we were able to gather. Sorry, that's backwards. So again, I'm stats major was my thing, so I know that my presentation is very black and white. It is very data driven. I focused more on the content than the visual appeal. So I'm sorry that this is not very interesting to look at. But the information displayed in the table is from a study conducted by the City of Traverse City's Treasurer's Office. The information displayed was taken directly from these municipalities. Published rates. So we tried to find cost information for cities that were relatively the same size by population or had the same type of wastewater treatment plant. If a municipality didn't provide both water and sewer services, they were excluded from the study. And so far, it's been 25 that we've been able to do like a comprehensive on. No other municipalities we've reviewed, which is approximately 25 outside the Grand Traverse County area offer any inclusion of usage in their ready-to-serve rates. Some municipalities are able to keep their costs lower by charging very high riser or lateral fees. That is industry terminology that essentially means the cost to hook up to their services. That's my understanding of it also. This works really well for entities that have for municipalities that have large growth. And we are, like I said earlier, we are going to revisit our rate structure for additional costs like this and see if we can make adjustments if appropriate, but only covering utility billing today. Just know that that's on the horizon. So without these changes, though, you can see that our costs fare pretty well when compared to other providers. However, this study did make me realize just how unique the city of Traverse City is. Escanaba is close in population, but they serve an area about double in square miles, so 16.5 to our 8.6. So it was very, very difficult to find an approximately apples to apples situation because the cost of services will vary so greatly based on population, the service area, the type of treatment plant. That being said, what we did find, our current rates fare very well. So this was our attempt to try to gather data, and it shows that our current rates do compare very well to statewide costs. Sometimes we get outreach from customers that will go along the lines of our rates being the highest in the state, and looking at this, it's really not true. So seeing that most other entities utilize that purely ready-to-serve fee with additional usage costs or consumption fees, you may be wondering why we include consumption at our base rate. So to provide us with a better understanding, we met with the former city treasurer, Bill Tweetmeyer, to gain a better understanding of past practices. We found that the base usage was set in the 1970s based on studies at the time that estimated minimum usage of a 4-person family. And that's the minimum usage of a 4-person family. So that 6 CCF was attempting to encompass what that minimum usage of that 4-person family would be. So therefore, the base rate was including 6 CCF. We believe that this inclusion of consumption does not align with current goals of conservation or equitable distribution of costs. But to verify, we wanted to look at our actual customer usage. So that's what we're moved into. What is our customers' average usage or consumption? And so Jackie reached out and a little bit proactively. I provided her with a little bit more information that I'm going to cover on the next slide. So thank you for your question, Jackie. But we pulled data from each quarter to observe our average. We pulled data from each quarter and removed outliers of no usage or very high usage, which was determined as above 40 CCF. And 40 CCF was chosen because it's 2.5 times the current estimated family of 4 usage at 12 CCF. So this is a very high usage at about 30,000 gallons. This is very high. Arguably, we could have removed more to not inaccurately overinflate the average. However, you can see that with these values included, our customer average usage is still lower than that 6 CCF that we're including for winter months. So the values in the winter months are of particular interest in isolating our customers' average minimum usage, because remember, this is the time when the customers are not using irrigation. So it is a better reflection of our customers' minimum usage. Also note that looking at 2022 census data, the average household size within the city of Traverse City is 2.85 people. So we would anticipate that the average usage for our customers is less than that national average for a family of 4. Our house size is smaller than that, so we would assume that our usage would be less than that. I also understand that a limitation of this usage study is the time period displayed. We transitioned to a new utility billing software in 2023, and we have had several meter changes that could skew data, and we'll cover those in part 2 of the presentation. But I don't think that we're able to reliably pull prior year's data based on those changes. This year, I know what's going on with our system. In prior years, there are changes that I can't account for, and so I won't be able to know if it is reflective of the population. And obviously, there are things that I could miss. We attempted to account for everything that we could. However, even if we pulled prior usage data, the weather usage should remain relatively the same because it's not weather dependent. So I still believe that this 1 year of data is a good representation of our population's minimum usage, because whether we have a ton of snow in the winter or no snow at all, this is the inside house usage. So this is a pretty good representation of what we're going to see our population using year to year. And then on to, before I move ahead, does anybody have questions on this part?
Just
so
quickly, sorry, I raised
that's okay,
I
sorry.
raised my hand too late. Is it further in your presentation, more discussion about irrigation versus drinking water? Or is this as good a time as any?
So irrigation is covered in part 2, and I do.
Okay, I'll wait till then.
It's not tonight though,
The
so
sequel.
that's kind of why we wanted to do both parts tonight. But I understand it's a huge amount of content, and so we wanted to give you guys some time to digest before we returned and addressed. We added new concepts into it.
I'll wait, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for asking though. Sorry, opposite direction again. So then this was a slide that I added in based on Jackie's request. She wanted to get a better understanding of the spread of the data. So thank you for your question again. Essentially, and I don't know if this is like too stats based, so if this is too much for prior meetings, just let me know. But essentially the main takeaways from the spread are that for all months in the data set, that interquartile range, or the middle 50% of usage, is between 2 CCF and 12 CCF. And that interquartile range is comprised of the dark colored box. So that's that 50% that encompasses 50% of customers. And that's between 2 and 12 CCF. The mode values, after accounting for those metering practices that I talked about, or the most commonly appearing build consumption, those mode values are between 2 and 3. So the most commonly appearing build usage is the 2 and 3 among all time periods evaluated, including summer months. This is likely due to customers residing in shared living complexes where the complex is responsible for outside water usage. It's important to note that the mode is a bit lower than our average customer usage in winter months, but for the remainder of this presentation, for purposes of minimum consumption, we are going to use our population's average usage in the winter months. Those average usages are, I don't know if you can see them, it's pretty tiny, but there's little X's in each of those boxes. Those are the average usages. And those were what we saw in the previous slide on that bar graph. So after review, I hope that gives you a little bit more idea of the spread of the data and how we decided how to set up tiers in our oncoming proposal. So customers often ask, why do I have to pay for 6 CCF? And based on the data that we just saw, it is a good question. And said, we suggest that all customers that were ready to serve would pay a monthly ready to serve fee, no matter their amount of usage. This ready to serve fee would cover each plant's operating expenditures less customer service costs. Currently, customers can request to suspend services if they leave for a period of time, but we would like to propose continuing to charge this ready to serve fee even when there is no usage, because the cost to operate the plant and be ready to serve them remains. So what does this actually look like in terms of cost and rates? We can go on to the next one if you guys are prepared. So as we discussed, our operating expenditures are approximately $3.6 million for water. And these are the costs to operate the plant and maintain the distribution system to be ready to serve the customers. We're suggesting to recapture these expenditures less customer service costs and ready to serve fees and other revenue sources. So those other revenue sources that I'm talking about are those bulk water agreements with the townships and those miscellaneous services that we're going to revisit with the water plant later. So when we remove those costs and those other revenue sources, we would have to recapture $1.9 million in our ready to serve rate. So what does that look like compared to what we're doing now? That's what the next slide is going to show you. And these are really tiny, I apologize. It's just, we have a lot. It reflects in-city and out-of-city, like you asked about earlier, Tim. So you can see our out-of-city customers and our in-city customers. And then also in the white is the current monthly base rate, and then the current revenue. Keep in mind, though, the current revenue down at the bottom of that little disclaimer, that's going to differ from what's in our actual budget because this is reflective of billing people who we aren't billing year-round right now. So this is like if we billed everybody year-round the base rate, which is, we don't do that right now, but for the purposes of this activity, that's what we did, because that's what we're proposing. So if we look at our current base rate revenue recapture, we can see that the proposed revenue recapture is less than what we're currently recapturing in the base rate. And so looking at this data, sorry, I just want to explain how we got to that. So we noticed that it was $1.9 million in operating costs, which is approximately 5.5% greater than what we're capturing now. So we reduced each base rate by that 5.5% to come up with the ready to serve rate. And looking at this data, it appears as if the proposal would decrease the ready to serve fee relative to the base rate. But remember, the current practice this year is a base rate including 6 CCF. Well, the proposal of a ready to serve rate does not include any consumption. So in the next slide, we're going to propose charging residential customers for all consumption based on a two-tiered structure. And so again, before reviewing these values, no, this is based on fiscal year 2025 data. It's not a reflection of what 2026 would be. It's just for theoretical purposes only. If we had implemented this plan this year, this is what the tiers would look like. So also note that next year there is a 3.25% increase in base rates built into Waterworth and a 3.5% increase in consumption built into Waterworth. So customers will see an increase in cost next year based on the scenarios that we've set up. So this isn't to say that we're trying to increase or decrease costs. We're trying to equitably distribute those costs. So going into that, to promote conservation without significantly changing our average consumer's bill. If we implemented it this year, we would propose to charge 25 cents for the first 4 CCF of consumption and $2.17 per CCF after. The $2.17 consumption rate is the current water rate we charge after 6 CCF. So the 4 CCF was chosen as the first year based on that average customer usage in the winter months. The 25 cents was determined by using Waterworth to verify rate discounts that we could provide to customers for that first 4 CCF and still generate the same amount of revenue to be in the same cash position that Brian's model was in. We did apply a conservative approach to our consumption though, because I'm assuming that there is going to be a customer response. I said that each customer, I know this isn't true, looking at the data that we had, I said that each customer for the first 4 CCF, they were billed at that first year. So I took our entire usage for the year, and I said, for every single customer, that first 4 is going to be billed at the lower rate. I know that that isn't true, though, because I know that my mode is lower than that. So I know that there are customers that are coming in lower than this average. So that is one place where I'm preparing to capture extra revenue, but I'm also trying to prepare for that rate instability that we might have if we propose this model. This is a more conservative model, and so I'm prepared for that customer. We're trying to be prepared for that customer response. So it was intentionally conservative, but it really just gives us time to gather more data based on customer responses. If we're more conservative this year, we're always going to be making adjustments to our models, and we know that our rate structure isn't going to be the only factor in impacting consumption, so we need to consider weather into the equation, but we'd like to try to track potential customer usage changes in response to this proposal. It's just going to be, we have to try to also factor in other things that could potentially change customer usage. So in the next slide, I'm going to show a comparison of residential customer bill changes based on usage, but before we move on, does anybody have questions about this proposal, this part of it? Okay. Yeah.
More just a thought that so Light and Power did something similar a few years back, and just maybe to talk to them about customer habits changing and or not changing. I don't recall what the
like what it.
I'm sure
but
we were
same
told.
customer base. Yeah.
Yeah, just as far I think like my recollection is fewer people changed their habits than Light and Power thought they would.
Yes.
Okay.
Too many of us just are oblivious. We
Well,
just like pay our bills and we don't even look closely at it.
Another exciting thing that, again, is in part 2 of the presentation, we have a new software that we're hoping to roll out to customers that would allow customers to see their usage in near real time. So that would be another way that we could promote conservation. It's exciting, but in the next part.
Thank you.
But that is good feedback to know to reach out to Carla. Sorry, Jackie?
I think I understood a couple of slides back that you're proposing a 5.5% shift, regardless of whether it was a small 5/8" line residential customer or a 6" line commercial customer. Has there been any kind of consideration for, sort of having a phased, less of an increase at the lower end and more of an increase or decrease at the upper end? I'm trying to find a way to
that makes
think
sense.
about our smallest residential customers.
And that's what our current rate structure does. So it is built up. So the larger your meter, as you can see on there, the larger your meter is, the larger your base rate's going to be. And so our current structure does have that in there. But if you look at it, I proportionally decreased it by the percentage. So because they were already tiered to be lower cost at a smaller size meter. I just applied the proportion of the 5.5% to everything so that, because they were already tiered, to promote larger revenue coming from the ready-to-serve rate for a larger meter. So I just applied that rate proportionally.
Would it be a difficult scenario to play with those decreased rates and give
We
less
could.
of a decrease at the upper end?
So we could, but one of the things that we wanted to consider in this, we're going to go over commercial customers. One of the things we wanted to consider in this is that we're also not trying to make the city of Traverse City a place that is difficult to do business in. So we weren't trying, when we did this distribution, we weren't trying to hit anybody too hard. We were really just trying to figure out like what would be the best, what did we see would be the most equitable distribution of cost. And because they already are tiered at the higher levels, we didn't consider charging them less because or giving them less of a decrease because they already saw that increased rate from their meter size. So we could do it, but it would really be penalizing commercial customers, and that wasn't the intention. It was really to equitably distribute these costs in a way that they aren't being distributed now.
Well, maybe for future conversation.
To look at.
Yes, Liz.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Treadwell had his hand up earlier, sorry.
Yes, I was also wanting, you had the breakdown of the numbers and what an average is, saying that you were taking out so many people at the higher end. Were there specific commonalities in that group of outliers, like large commercial users, basically?
No value after 12 CCF represented over 1% of the usage. So there wasn't a good way to cluster after that. So, because I pulled mode data and I pulled proportional information. Oh, sorry. So that was for June, and so I said, how many 12s do we have in here? And you get your percentage. And then I said, okay, how many 36s do we have in here? And those values did not account for even 1% of the population. It was below 1%. So there wasn't a natural secondary tier, but that is something that we talked about. What if we had a secondary tier? So once we get more data, we could say, okay, where would be this secondary tier? What would be the next step to do that? But because this is such a big change that we're proposing on our staff and also on customers, we're trying to make it easy to understand and then also set ourselves up to be able to implement something like that in the future. So not making all these changes at once, but proposing to start somewhere, get more data, make changes once we have more information.
And do you have numbers on how many either residential or total customers would be below that 4 CCF number?
So accounting for the zero usage, that was, they were within, if we go back to that box plot, those customers, sorry, those customers and I'm sorry, this is really tiny, but there, you can see that that mode data, it does encompass, that box is 50%, and the 4 is above that. So there's actually a decent amount that are below that 4. If you can, it's hard to see from over here or from on the screen, but there are, it looks like from the graph about 35% of customers would be underneath that 4 CCF. And that seems accurate because our mode is between 2 and 3.
Okay. I just know on the bill that my landlord shows me, if the whole household is under 6, then it has no impact, so.
Yeah, that's how our rates are right now. So if the usage is below that 6, then you're not seeing a difference in rate between somebody who has
yeah, and I can't even
1
see,
CCF of usage.
Based on what my landlord shows me, I don't even see how much below the 6 we are, but.
Like where it's at, actually.
Yes.
And that, like, getting onto like the individual level, it's going to be different for everybody. So depending on your usage, you're either going to be for this or against it. But I am trying to equitably distribute. That's like the intention is that equity in there. So I did choose that 4 for that first, for our tier.
And I believe we're moving into the business now, right? Or the commercial?
Yep, commercial. Yep, thank you. Well, first, sorry, I just wanted to show, we are moving into commercial right after this, but this is an example of how this would impact a customer's bill at 12 CCF, 6 CCF, and 4 CCF at the bottom there. The blue are the current conditions, the green are the proposed conditions, and then the monthly increase or decrease is shown in that pink. And you can see for customers, even at the 4 CCF level, there is that 12-cent increase. I did not include customers below that rate because those customers will be seeing, in this scenario, those customers will be seeing a decrease in their rate. It's those 1, 2, 3 consumers, they're going to see a decrease because they're going to get that minimum that incentivizing 25 cents rate for the first 4, and the way that the base rate is reducing based on a ready-to-serve fee, it's reducing by 88 cents, and the consumption for 4 CCF is $1. So if you had 3 CCF, it'd be 75 cents. You're going to net and have a lower bill than you would have under the current method. But really, I would say that the current method is kind of it's kind of subsidizing those larger users with those lower users. So these are the customers that should be seeing this decrease. That is the equitable distribution here. So you're seeing an increase of 446 for these higher usage customers, but that's because they haven't seen these increases based on the rate structure, the base rate structure that we've had in the past. They've just kind of been lumped in with that 0 to 6. And so our proposal is to tier more, and the 4 CCF customer does see a 12-cent increase, but the lower customers don't. And you'll notice like there is a $4.46 difference between the 12 CCF and the 6 CCF customer, but overall that person is paying $13.02 more for water than the 6 CCF customer because they're paying those additional consumption fees. So then proposal on commercial customers where Amy was looking. So a very similar approach to commercial customers where the 6 CCF is in their base rate right now. Under the proposed method, we'd propose to shift to that same ready-to-serve fee cost as the residential customers, where there's no usage included in the ready-to-serve fees. And we'd also like to propose a constant cost for usage at the same rate as residential customers over 4 CCF at $2.17 for all usage. So right now they're getting that CCF included, same as residential customers. Looking at why we had that 6 CCF included, I don't know why we would include that for commercial customers or even irrigation going into that. We did that before, but my proposal for irrigation is going to be similar to this. I'm proposing that we charge for all usage for commercial customers. We're not giving that 6 CCF discount anymore. So that's what this change would make based on 2025 data. I keep saying that, but this is just a proposal. If we had 2026 data, these numbers would look totally different. So this is just for theoretical purposes. We would be suggesting to use this methodology, but apply it to next year's budget. So these aren't the numbers that I'm proposing for next year. I'm proposing numbers, we'll be proposing numbers in May based on next year's actual budget. This is just if we implemented this year, what these values would look like. So similar to the last slide, the blue is the month under current conditions, the green is under proposed conditions, while the pink is the difference. So on top, you'll see that 4-inch meter customer, and they're seeing a $2.79 increase. The bottom is that 2-inch customer, a $7.90 increase. And that's due to that consistent proportionality of decreasing that base rate. So it is a $5 difference monthly between the 4-inch customer and the 2-inch customer right now. And so we could play around more with stratifying costs for commercial customers with larger meters, but that wasn't something that we considered in this scenario. We just kept our base rates and said across the board 5.5% decrease. So we're going to go into the same methodology on sewer. That's everything that I have to propose for water, but we're going to go into sewer. Very, very similar. But before we do, does anybody have questions on these proposals?
Good overview. I think we've got time to chew on it too before part 2.
Yeah, you'll have time. Sorry, so we're at slide 22 of 31. We're about a third of the way there, but that presentation was a large portion of the last one. So similar to what we did with water, we're going to review sewer operating expenditures, approximately $6.8 million. Remember, these are the costs to operate the plant and maintain the distribution system to be ready to serve customers. So similar to water, we're suggesting to recapture these expenditures, less the customer service costs and ready-to-serve fees. Ready-to-serve fees, other sewer revenue services, and the township contributions. So when we remove those other revenue sources, we find that the amount that we need to recapture in ready-to-serve fees is approximately $33.6 million. So then again, what does that actually look like as a rate? Similar to water, this is the distribution. Way, way less information here though, because like we talked about, sewer only has that one tier because larger consumers are required to abide by pretreatment regulations. So we have the one rate. We're proposing to change that. But when we apply that same methodology where we say, okay, what are we capturing right now in our base rates versus what do we want to be capturing in our ready-to-serve rate, the difference there is 15%. So across the board, sewer customers would see a 15% decrease in their usage. under this methodology for a ready-to-serve rate. And again, looking at the data, it appears like the proposal would decrease the ready-to-serve fee relative to the base rate, but similar to water, the current practice this year is a base rate including 6 CCF. Well, the proposal is that ready-to-serve fee, no consumption included. So in the next, very similar to water, we're going to be showing that 2-tiered system for residential customers. So right now, it's no additional charge up to that 6 CCF, $5.95 after. I want to propose $2 per CCF up to 4 CCF, $5.95 after. And again, it was the same methodology used as for water. So I said, how can we conservatively estimate our consumption, but raise the same amount of revenue to give these customers a break to be in the same cash position that we were in the water, in Brian's estimated proposal. And I also want to mention in our model for Waterworth, we did build in a rate increase about 4.5%. So under this proposed method, that rate increase would be 1.5% in 2026. That was kind of what Ari was saying in my scenario, where I was trying to smooth out water rate increases over the years instead of doing a larger jump closer to the sooner rather than later, where I'm distributing the 1.5% through the entire timeline instead of doing a 3% rate increase now, 3.5% rate increase again. So on the next slide, we'll look at what we did for, we'll look at what we did for water, with showing how this is going to impact the customers. So again, this is based on 2025 data. 2026 would look totally different, apply the same methodology. So we would expect to see a 4 CCF user, you see that at the bottom, experience an increase of 95 cents per month. So we're not proposing that everybody is getting a decrease, but those users below 4 CCF will see a decrease in their bill based under this proposed method. Again, across all scenarios that are listed here, you see that increase, but we didn't include the people that were going to be getting a decrease because I thought it was more accurate to display the customers that would be what you'd see with a customer that's going to get an increase. So very similar to water, we'd like to propose a comparable distribution for commercial customers, but not include that first tier of usage. So right now, no charge up to 6 CCF, $5.95 after. We want to propose $5.95 for all usage. And then the ready-to-serve fee at the same rate, that $47, I think it's $3.95 now. So that same ready-to-serve fee for all customers. And in the next slide, we see those scenarios. So based on 2025 data, this is what it would do to your commercial sewer customer with a 4-inch or a 2-inch meter. You see that the output is exactly the same because it's all it is that inclusion of the first 6 CCF. So that's the cost you're seeing there, that $28.65. It's the inclusion of the first 6 CCF less the difference in the base rate versus the ready-to-serve fee. Did anybody have any questions on that? Sorry, I just moved ahead, but this is the combined water sewer residential customer bill. So 2025 data, it would increase the 12 CCF per month by $17.31 and the 6 CCF by $17.31, a net increase for the 4 CCF user of $107, and then anybody below that would be seeing a decrease in their bill. And then again, combined water and sewer, the same information. The 4-inch customer would see a $31.44 increase, and then the 2-inch customer would see the $36.55. And then just this is slide 30 of 31, we're almost there. Just some additional considerations. We've touched on most of these considerations throughout the presentation, starting with conservative consumption assumptions, which allow for variability in customer usage based on these changes. So if customers are more conservative, we aren't falling below our necessary operating position. We've accounted for that. Also, as operational costs increase, we should expect costs to provide services to increase. So the current proposal attempts to smooth out these increases between 1% and 3.5%. And as the data changes, these rates will change. Like I said, that scenario that we build is a completely flexible model. As soon as we know more information, we're updating that model. So if we had an unexpected large capital project, just like Arian showed in his presentation, we would need to make adjustments, but we would be able to plan for that in our scenario. Not if it's right ahead. We'd have to make adjustments, but we could still plan to recapture funding and build that fund balance again. And then lastly, I would like to revisit and refine the methodology once we have more than 1 year of reliable data, but this is the proposal based on the data that we do have. And then the last side is proposals for future operations. So from all the data that we covered. We don't really have that many proposals for future operations, as you can see summarized above. So this concludes part 1 of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions? I was going to say before we move on to part 2, but that's for another time. I knew this was going to be a little while, so thank you guys for listening to me for 2 hours.
Part 2 is going to be a real cliffhanger.
And for commissioners, I think if we have any questions about what's been presented today or some additional data or anything we'd like to see supporting based on where we're approaching, if you have, I know the city manager asked us for input too on the presentation itself. If we have more aesthetic or presentation preferences, maybe we can email those offline, but as far as data, and of course, if we think of anything after this, I'm sure they absolutely want us to email us. For those in the audience, I'm sure you'll be very excited that the sequel will probably be in our first study session of January of 2025, so make sure you don't miss that one. But we just need to get, I would say by New Year, let's try to get them anything that pops into our heads or any preferences that we might have, but also floor is open now for immediate questions. Go ahead, Tim.
Could we get your beautiful color versions?
Yes,
What came
yeah.
through to us
I'm
was black
I'm
and
sorry.
white.
Yeah, yeah.
They're so
Yeah.
so beautiful compared to the black and whites that you guys have.
Yeah.
That would be
And
great.
again, I'm
The
sorry.
pink's very
I
helpful.
stats major. I have a degree in stats and a
Yeah.
degree in accounting. Neither one has any form of
No, but
visual
these are
creativity in
great.
there.
They're
So.
just easier. to
Ours,
pick
but ours
out.
in our packet are literally black and
They're
white as
black and
opposed to like
white.
the pink
So to
column
So to
and
have,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
So-
yeah, so you can't see the blue and the green
Yes.
and pink.
Gradients
Yep,
are tough to
absolutely.
see.
Sorry guys, I thought you were making
no.
a play on my
We're on board.
visual
We're on board,
aesthetics. So
Really,
there
no,
you go.
they're
Thank you
great.
guys.
In color, they're great. And then just a comment that this is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
And your whole department, staff, so much. Like, this is what I know Amy and myself for years have been hoping we would get to. And it looks like you've done it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
you guys. I
Agreed.
put a lot of work into this, so thank you so much.
Any other questions before we let Jana and her great job presenting and the rest of the team today get a break here? All right. Seeing none, I'll let you off the hook now for part 1.
Thank you. Are I okay to unplug, Sarah? Okay.
Okay, and again, we'll email if we have anything else that pops into our heads or any other feedback that we want to give, and we'll have that second conversation in the new year, I'm guessing. And with that, we do have, I'll let Jana finish up there. No, you're fine. We do have general public comment, so it can be on these sewage rates or it can be anything else. If anybody else has anything else they wanted to speak on. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the city commissioners. Any final comments from commissioners? Seeing none, meeting is adjourned. Everybody who needs signatures, anyone up here can sign, so come on up. The meeting is adjourned.